All right, guys, Prince Sports here. Now, I always do videos on battles between players. Player comparison is what I call them. So we're going to do one between two premier All-Stars under the name of Paul George, PG-13, versus Devin Booker, no nickname. This guy's been playing in the league for a couple of years now. Don't get a nickname. It's kind of weird for an All-Star not to have a nickname. But anyway, let's get into it, Don. All right, so we're going to go over the 8 categories we're going to be talking about and battling it out with. Scoring ability, athletic ability, defense, clutch, leadership, basketball IQ, impact, one-on-one, and lastly but not least, career. So let's start off with scoring. 2 of these guys are premier scorers. They like scoring the ball. They're great one-on-one scorers. Paul George blossomed into being a great one-on-one scorer against none other than LeBron James. So came into the league, was lighting it up on that Indiana Pacers team. Came up short against the Miami Heat, but technically there wasn't a super team like that. You had Paul George, Roy Hibbert, and Paul George was the only really all-star on that team. All them other dudes was just, glorified role players, basically. But nevertheless, that's when he got his foot in the door for scoring. Came against LeBron James, That's when we started to know who Paul George was. He started to blossom. Devin Booker, on the other hand, he's a great scorer, a great one-on-one scorer, a streaky shooter, But if I had to pick between those two guys when it comes to scoring, I'm going with Devin Booker. He could score in bunches, and I go by when both of these guys get hot. And when Devin Booker gets hot, his effects on the game is way more devastating than Paul George. Paul George is very inconsistent on scoring. He could drop 39 one night and 5 or 6 points the next night and just completely throw it in. So scoring goes to Devin Booker. Number 2, athletic ability. Okay? Athleticism. I'm going to give that one strictly to Paul George. He's taller. He could jump higher. And even before that injury, he still managed to keep his athletic ability when he had that scary injury with his leg. So he still managed to stay athletic. He's tall, got long arms. I'm going with Paul George for the athletic ability. Now we round it off to defense. Defense, Paul George, hands down, is a better defender than Devin Booker. Okay? Him and Kawhi Leonard are considered like top premier defenders. Okay? Paul George will defend. He will play defense. Okay? And he's just a strictly better defensive player than Devin Booker. He has more effect on the defensive end than Devin Booker. I don't think Devin Booker will ever be a good defensive player, really, because he's so focused on scoring. So that's why I gave him the scoring. But I'm definitely going to give the defense to Paul George. Now then we go with clutch ability. Clutch ability, I'm going with Devin Booker. Okay? Paul George, even though he's been in situations, more clutch-like situations than Devin Booker, but he also came up very short a lot of times in the clutch. And man, after the meltdown he had with the Denver Nuggets, hitting a shot on the side of the backboard, disappearing, getting cooked by Damian Lillard in the clutch, no. He disappears in the clutch, especially in the playoffs. Now, we can't say the same thing for Devin Booker because, he hasn't made the playoffs yet, but he does have more clutch moments in the regular season than Paul George. So I'm giving him the nod over Paul George in clutch ability. Then it's leadership. Now, both of these guys are tailor-made for number 2. I don't see franchise player in Devin Booker. I don't see franchise player in Paul George. So both of these guys are number 2 sidekicks. So they get an even vote for me. It's tied on this one. I mean, you can make a case that it could be tied for clutch too, because both of them aren't the most best clutch plays that you could possibly think of. And then it comes down to basketball IQ, okay? I'm giving that to Paul George, okay? He's been in bigger moments, and he does have some moments when he showed up, okay? He has some moments when he did his thing, and, you know, I'm going to give him the edge slightly when it comes to basketball IQ, because he does do a lot of boneheaded things, especially in the postseason. But you got to count the regular season too, and he's been MVP candidate, something Devin Booker hasn't been. So his basketball IQ is a tad bit better than Devin Booker. Now, then secondly, impact. Now, this impact one, I'm going to give a tie again to both of them, because both of their impact, I think, is equally to the same. You know, Devin Booker could flame out sometimes. Paul George could flame out sometimes. And when they get hot, they get hot. And I think in the fourth quarter, Devin Booker's a tad bit better. But for the most part, you could say their impact on the game is roughly the same. Paul George has a more impact on defensive end, and Devin Booker has more of an impact on scoring. Now, then it comes to one-on-one. Now, one-on-one, both of these guys guarding each other, I'm going to give the edge to Devin Booker. I think Devin Booker has a better skill set for scoring, and he's a better shooter. He's a better shooter from three, too. Paul George is very squeaky on offense. I think I could rely on Devin Booker scoring better and more than Paul George. Then lastly but not least, I'm going with career. Okay? Career goes to Paul PG-13. Now, he does have the advantage of playing with better players. Now, he's now playing with Kawhi Leonard. He played with Russell Westbrook. So you play with these guys, you tend to go a little further than a guy like Devin Booker, who hasn't played with as much talent as Paul George. But nevertheless, career-wise, even though Paul George folded in some playoff moments, I still rather have Paul George's career than Devin Booker, because Devin Booker hasn't been to the playoffs yet. So, with that being said, here's the final score. 4-3. Paul George beats Devin Booker. So what do you guys think? Is there a category that you think Devin Booker has an edge in, or Paul George has an edge in? Or do you think some of them should have been more even? You know, even Steven. Tell me in the comment section down below. Keep it 3,000. All right, done? I'm out. Peace.